Hi everyone, it's Kate here with Skeena Wild, and we're busy gearing up for the 2026 salmon season. In this video, we're going to take a look at the salmon returns that we're expecting to the Skeena, Nass, and other North Coast systems this year, as well as some of the ocean and freshwater conditions that those fish have experienced leading up to this year and how that may influence this year's returns, as well as just how conditions are shaping up so far this year and what we might expect to see later this summer. The information we're sharing in this video comes from Fisheries and Oceans Canada, First Nations fisheries programs in the Skeena and Nass, in particular the Nisga'a Fisheries Program, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the Province of BC, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Kicking things off with Skeena Chinook already making their way back into the river, the forecast remains quite poor, with a point estimate of about 33,000, which is similar to the past few years, which have seen very small improvements, but all well below the long-term average. Fisheries and Oceans is using a new model to estimate Chinook abundance, which is shown here, so if you're super observant, you might notice some changes to previous estimates. The Tyee test fishery began operations on June 10th this year, and so far Chinook are tracking very similar to recent years at low abundance as expected. For Skeena Sockeye, the pre-season forecast for the total run ranges from about 730,000 to 3.3 million, with a point estimate of 1.5 million for this year, which is below the long-term average of about 2 to 2.5 million, and lower than last year's total run of an estimated 1.9 million. While some of those 1.5 million will be intercepted and harvested in Southeast Alaska, with a return to Canada greater than 1.05 million, we can anticipate opportunities for FSC or First Nations food, social, and ceremonial fishing, as well as commercial and recreational fishing for sockeye this year. Interestingly, the season started with a push of sockeye past the Tyee in the first few days of its operation, shown on the graph on the left-hand side by the little orange bump in daily escapement relative to long-term percentiles. And as of June 16th, just over 20,000 sockeye are estimated past the Tyee, which is more than average for this time. But it's very early and we won't know what that means for the sockeye return until we are further into the season. The forecast for Skeena Coho is below average, despite a fairly strong return in 2023 compared to recent years. Unfortunately, 2023 and 2024 were very challenging years with drought conditions throughout the watershed, as well as marine heat waves in the Northeast Pacific, which creates uncertainty with this year's return, and we'll touch more on that later in the video. While there is no formal forecast for Skeena chum have been at concerningly low abundance for several decades, and no changes are expected. While it's a non-dominant year for pink salmon in the Skeena and Nass, 2024, which was the parent year for this year's returns, was quite strong for an even year, and good returns are expected for pink salmon this year. There is no pre-season forecast for steelhead, but 6 of the last 7 years have been low returns, including some of the lowest on record, with an estimated return last year of just over 12,000 steelhead, which is well below the threshold for conservation concern. Skeena steelhead remain an ongoing conservation concern. In the Nass, the forecast for Chinook remains relatively poor, with a point estimate of 31,000, which would be higher than recent years, but still below average compared to abundance before significant productivity declines. It's also worth noting that the 5-year average model has been recommended for use for pre-season planning this year, which predicts a point estimate of only 23,000 Chinook for this year. The Nass sockeye total run forecast ranges from about 243,000 to about 1 million, with a point estimate of 507,000 for this year, which is a bit below the long-term average and similar to last year's run of about 480,000. Good returns of Nass coho and pink salmon are forecasted for this year, and here you can see how 2025 returns compared to previous years for Nass pinks, coho, chum, and steelhead. Salmon and steelhead returns to the Skeena and Nass are affected by fishing in Southeast Alaska, where they are intercepted as they make their migration home, particularly in Districts 104 along the outside of the Alaskan Panhandle and District 101 as they approach the Nass. The forecast for pink salmon catch in Southeast Alaska for 2026 is 19 million pinks, which is very similar to catch in both 2025 and 2024. Although it's labeled a pink salmon directed fishery, sockeye are much more valuable in the market, and it's the sockeye out in District 104 in particular, migrating to the Skeena and other systems, that the fishery is after. The projected sockeye catch for this year is 948,000, which is significantly more than last year's catch. Southeast Alaska is also projected to catch 162,000 Chinook this year, most of which are non-Alaskan origin Chinook migrating to rivers in British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. This year's salmon returns are influenced not only by the number of salmon that returned in their parent year and interceptions in other fisheries, but also the freshwater and marine conditions that they experienced during spawning, egg incubation, their early life in lakes and streams, and life at sea. While conditions were variable among those years, of note is the severe drought conditions that began in the summer of 2023 and continued into 2024 and even 2025. Low flows and warm water temperatures can decrease survival and spawning success, and there were significant pre-spawn mortality events observed during those years. 2023 was also a year of El Niño conditions, which means warmer than average sea surface temperatures in the Northeast Pacific. So the heat events observed in that year are likely influencing Sockeye, Chinook, Coho, and chum returns this year. In 2024, we transitioned to La Niña, or cooler sea surface temperatures, which generally means there's larger, more nutritious food available for salmon at sea. And we've oscillated between La Niña and neutral conditions since then, until this month. We've just recently officially transitioned back to El Niño, which means warmer than average sea surface temperatures, and generally means warmer, drier conditions inland as well. You may have heard about this super El Niño that everyone's talking about. What it means is that El Niño conditions are expected to strengthen over the summer and fall, with fairly high confidence that there will be a very strong El Niño over the winter, with sea surface temperatures hitting 2 degrees above average in the equatorial Pacific. The last time we saw an El Niño of this strength was in 2015 and 2016. But strong El Niños don't necessarily mean the impacts will be felt everywhere, but the likelihood of seeing those impacts increases. For salmon at sea during this time, it might mean smaller, less nutritious food is available this winter and in future years. Luckily, in the Skeena and Nass, we're starting this season in a bit better position compared to the last 3 years with respect to the snowpack and spring melt. Overall in the region, we had a fairly average, even slightly above average snowpack this year, and it held through much of the spring. As of June 1st, the snowpack was still at 115% of normal for that date. And you can see in the bottom right graph there, this is quite different than the past 3 years, in which snowpack was around 50% of normal by June 1st, and we experienced severe drought conditions during those years. Hopefully this sets us up well for the summer and helps to buffer some of the challenging conditions salmon and steelhead have been experiencing in recent years. The environmental variability and more extreme conditions we're experiencing highlights the need for in-season adaptive management of all salmon and steelhead, and to continue the transition towards selective fisheries, which can selectively harvest populations of known abundance while avoiding or releasing with minimal harm species and populations of concern. We're excited to be working with First Nations in the Skeena leading this transition and to showcase some of those fisheries again this year. Thank you so much for watching this video. We will have more updates coming out as the season gets underway, and you can always reach out to us with questions at info@skeenawild.org. And as a reminder, as always, if you are heading out fishing, please make sure to check the current regulations before you head out. Until next time.